Okay, we'll get this party started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fundraising Talk. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate having you here. If you could pop a little note into the chat and let us know who you are and where you're from, especially if this is your first time joining us, please do that. And we look forward to a really interesting, interactive conversation today. Kelvin.
Thank you, Melanie, and good morning and welcome, everybody. All right, normal housekeeping. If we're going to ask cameras are off, you are muted. Put your questions into the chat box. We do monitor the chat and we will be answering those questions at the end. The session is recorded just to disclose for the POPI Act and for disclosure. So if your question is contentious, you can put it from an anonymous or you can direct it to Melanie and I privately. Because this recording is put on a YouTube channel, so it is in the public platform once it is completed. The recording will be on the YouTube channel by lunchtime today, and we will give you notification on the WhatsApp group, so you can go and download it. All of our previous webinars are also on the YouTube channel, so please go and access those resources. They are free. If you're not in our WhatsApp group, please get hold of Melanie or myself, because we advertise what's happening and we also have a lot of traffic on the WhatsApp group of upcoming events and webinars. Melanie, if you want to go first.
Well, thank you, kind sir. My name is Melanie Jackson. I am a fundraising consultant based in Cape Town. I've had my consultancy called Words That Count for 8 years now. I am an enthusiastic advocate for fundraising. I believe that we make the world go round. So I'm really excited to be a part of this amazing tribe and movement. It was Kelvin's brainchild in the depths of lockdown that we should start a webinar, and it's really been amazing. So I'm so chuffed at how it's gone.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, so for those of you that haven't met us before, my name is Kelvin Glenn. There's my Twitter handle and contact details. My organization is called Kaluma SA, which is also a company that focuses on assisting charities in the nonprofit sector. And we work, like Melanie, in helping charities be the best they can be. Melanie and I have known each other for many years and worked together across many different career paths in the sector. And we really enjoy being able to share. And we always disclose that we're not the experts. We are merely the facilitators. We take our best practice, our learnings, international best practice, and we bring it together once a week and we share it with you, our tribe. But this tribe being Fundraising Talk can only be as successful as the team that bring it together. So we really value your participation. We value your feedback. And we really are happy to see that it's growing day by day. And Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're over 180 people now in our WhatsApp group, which is getting big, but that's fantastic. So for those of you that are not on the WhatsApp group, it's a great networking tool. It's not a marketing platform. It's a networking tool, and it's a tool for us to advocate and communicate with each other about things that are happening in our sector that are going to help each other so we can all be better fundraisers and do more for our communities. So without further ado, we're going to go straight into today. And today we're talking governance.
Thanks, Kelvin. So as you can see from our advert, we're talking about the 5 ways that governance can support fundraising. And what we want to try to do is keep pulling it back to, yes, we talk about governance and boards and what they need to look like and all that, but we need to keep pulling it back to fundraising and how that impacts on fundraising. So this is just a quick whiz through of what we're going to unpack during the session. The 5 ways that governance can support fundraising is by offering ethical leadership, guidance, and stewardship. So important. That's what our board is there for. They're also an amazing repository of institutional knowledge and history. And I noticed I spelled institutional wrong. I'm so sorry about that. I'm the proofreader in the family. It's the board carry that institutional knowledge within themselves. And you'll find that when you have a board member who's been on the board for a while, they are an amazing resource. The other thing that our boards do is ensure that we have enough resources to fulfill our mission. Critically important. Sometimes your donor does not want to talk to you, the fundraiser, nor do they want to talk to your CEO. They want to talk to someone that they consider a peer, someone who is at their level in business or in life. And your board becomes very powerful when it comes to that type of donor. And the last thing that we feel supports fundraising so strongly is that boards are advocates for the organization. They're ambassadors. They're the ones who help to build our public profile through their own networks, through their own commitments. So that's what we're going to touch on today.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Oopsie. All right, so talking about boards, and we put the diagram on the left just because I love diagrams and pictures. I think it's so much easier to contextualize. But the board of directors, management, and your stakeholders, because your board of directors and your management work together on a day-to-day business, and there's very clearly defined roles of the role of the board and the role of management. But don't forget your stakeholders, because without your stakeholders being your donor and your organizations or your beneficiaries that you're working with, you don't have an organization. So the board of directors, management, and stakeholders need to work together to find that sweet spot in the center of that circle, which is one united goal. And that is helping our donors to leverage their support to the beneficiaries, helping our board in good governance and supporting management to be the best we can be, and then empowering and supporting management as well. So governance refers to the process of structure to direct and manage the organization. Really, their role is to help us be on focus, on point, and achieve those goals. Good governance systems are designed to help organizations focus on activities that contribute most to their overall objectives. And I want to emphasize this because unless the board of directors and your governance structure is supporting you to be the best you can be, then you've got to unpack that, because then there's a problem. And let's not stick our head in the sand. Boards go through cycles. Organizations go through cycles. There are challenges sometimes around the relationship between management and boards, or what we call gatekeepers, where one person's working with a board member or one person's the gatekeeper to the board. We have to make sure that we're working together, we collectively understand where we're going and how we're going to achieve those. So the board's role is to be a support structure, to have oversight, and to make sure the organization is resourced enough to be able to achieve its objective, but also that we are compliant, that we are adhering to all the laws, and most importantly, that management is performing optimally. So everything ultimately is in the interest of our stakeholders, but unless the board of directors, management, and stakeholders are all on the same page, those circles are not going to come together. And that's what you want, to get that balance right.
So why should we be worried about good governance? What is the importance of good governance? Well, it helps to make sure that our day-to-day work, the stuff we get really bogged down in, aligns with and contributes to achieving our purpose. And as we all know, every nonprofit's purpose should be obsolescence ultimately. We want to be able to solve the problem that we've set out to. And we need to be able to focus on that, knowing that the issues of governance, the issues of ethics, stewardship, leadership are being dealt with. So board members must ask themselves, what are they doing here? What are they doing? Why are we here, more importantly? Oh, let's start that again, because damn, she's long today. Why is always my favorite question. I love Simon Sinek's start with why. Why are we here? What is the problem we're trying to solve? What are we doing to solve it? And how are we going about it? So if anybody is a fan of Simon Sinek, you'll see the golden circle appearing very clearly there. And asking and answering those questions help us to stay true to our mission. And I think, Kelvin, there might be a future fundraising talk topic sitting right there about reconnecting with our why. I think we need to do that. But
I think that's a great one.
That's what good governance needs to do. It needs to reconnect us to our purpose, to our mission, and allow us to fulfill it. Kelvin?
And just I love sharing stories, but I was very fortunate and blessed in an organization that I worked with, that our chairman at the opening of every single board meeting would take 5 minutes to go through the why. Just regroup. Why are we here? Why did this organization start? Who are we serving? Just so that you're grounded, because you can get so distracted when you're dealing with issues and pressure of funding and challenges that sometimes we go off course, as we do in life. So advice back to your boards is really look at those three things. Why are you here? What are we doing? And how are we doing it? So thank you for that, Melanie. And I think you've got a great idea there of the why for a future topic. So ethical leadership, that's you.
No, is it me? No, it's you.
No, it's me. We do rehearse this, guys, I promise. Ethical leadership, guidance, and stewardship. And then, if I can move my slides, they play nicely. What is going on today? See,
We're having one of those days.
Murphy's Law. There we go. Okay. And it's me again, Mel, right?
You can carry on, yeah.
Yeah. Right. There are some responsibilities that are common to most boards. So the typical thing, and this was taken from research that was done by one of the big 5 accounting firms. They did a lovely piece on boards and governance. And whether it's an NPO, whether it's a corporate, whether it's a whatever, the rules are the same in the sense of responsibilities. And the most responsibilities for boards, this is not the extensiveness, but the things that we pulled out, accountability. Is the organization being accountable to its donors and to society? And as the directors, if you research the IOD King report and the roles and responsibilities of directors, they are ultimately liable. But at the end of the day, they need to make sure the organization is being accountable. They need to make sure the organization has a strategy and that strategy is extremely focused. We have seen, I don't know about you, Melanie, but I've been inundated with organizations screaming now saying, help, we need to refocus our strategy. We need to rewrite our strategy because of COVID, because the world's gone mad. And as much as that's like hysteria, it's the right thing the board are doing if they're saying, guys, we need to take a step back and relook. So accountability, strategy, resourcing. And this is a hobby horse of mine. It is very disheartening when we look at organizations and we go in and do an assessment or an audit of an organization, and the board has this very detailed strategy with some really great goals and some amazing figures on the table of what we need to fundraise and all the people are going to help and da. And the team is this size. Resourcing is so important. If you're going to have a strategy and you're going to have a good business plan and you've got great goals, we have to make sure we have adequate resourcing to ensure we can achieve those. Not only to bring the money in, but on the flip side, we have some organizations that are fantastic at bringing money in, but my golly gosh, implementing programs and reporting back is diabolical. Or we have organizations that do phenomenal program work because they've got no resources to raise the money. So as management, we need to push back to the board to say, guys, resourcing is important. Have we got the right people on the right seat on the bus that are best positioned to do what we need to do to achieve that strategy? Advocacy. The board's role is really to look at making sure that there is advocacy and that we are doing a lot of work around advocacy and making sure the organization is advocating not only for your organization, but for the sector you serve. So if you're working in childcare and the rights of the child, are you contributing to acts around protection of children? All those sorts of things. Governing policies. It is vitally important. Sorry, I just want to do something here. It is vitally important that there are governing policies. And I know that sounds onerous and sometimes the files are this thick, but unless you've got policies to guide management, you can't expect management to be held accountable. So we need to make sure that the policies are there. And management needs to have a say and an input in developing those policies and putting those policies together and making sure those policies are communicated and rolled out effectively. And then lastly, organizational performance. And having had many CEO hats, it is always tough when you have to go into that performance review with your chairman and your board, where they're not only looking at you as the CEO, but they're looking at the whole organization and saying, what if, but we can do better here. We've done great there. But at the end of the day, it is the role of the CEO to carry that and work with his or her team to make sure the organization is performing optimally. So if you look at this list of 6 things, it's all about that. But don't take it that way, because at the end of the day, if you've got a board that are doing their job well, they are going to be asking the tough questions. They are going to be challenging you. They are going to be pushing the boundaries. They are going to be holding you accountable. And it's not personal. It's because they are the custodians of that letterhead that have to take ultimate responsibility to ensure the organization is standing by the why, the what, and the how. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, and I've had the unfortunate situation once in my life, and I pray God it never has to happen again, where I've had to switch off the lights. And believe you me, it is a nasty thing to have to do. But at the end of the day, the board of directors have to answer some tough questions about how we got here and why the organization had to switch off the lights. So it is the responsibility of the board to make sure that they're holding themselves and the organization accountable. And you as management have been mandated to implement that strategy and to roll out those programs and to roll out the overall organizational plan. So if the board are asking tough questions, it's not because they're gunning you, it's because they're doing their job properly. On the flip side, if your board is sitting back and coming for tea and cake and going, nice, tick, 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 and patting you on the back and saying, great job, you need to push back and push and challenge them, because they need to be more participatory and they need to be more involved and they need to be more engaging to ensure that you as management are the best you can be. And ultimately, if management is doing the best it can do, it means that it's going to make fundraising that much easier. Right, I'm off my hobby horse. Let's move on. Is this one mine or yours? Because I think we've lost track now.
We slightly lost track, but do carry on.
Okay, go. So, on this one, and the photograph I've used is intentional. It's not to be derogatory to anybody, because the perception, not only here globally, is that that is the picture. You've got a bunch of people sitting in a closed room, very conservative, making decisions in the organization. So the board's roles and responsibilities to act with reasonable care and diligence, to act in the best interest of the organization with proper charitable purpose, not to improperly use information or their position and power, or the organization's position. We've seen this happen, unfortunately, with some people sit on boards for the wrong reasons. They ultimately have to answer, and the chairman or the treasurer needs to sign off on those annual financial statements. So they need to make sure the organization's financial affairs are sound. Disclose any and manage any conflicts of interest. And the challenge to you as the audience today, ladies and gentlemen, is, are you challenging your board or asking your board to disclose conflicts of interest? Are they signing a document to say they have no conflicts of interest? And conflict is 2 ways. Where I had an interesting one where a very loyal donor who was very supportive, the CEO of that company happened to also sit on our board, made fundraising a little bit easier when it came to asking that particular company for money, because it was almost a given. And for many years, they supported this organization. However, when we changed auditors, the first thing our auditor asked for is that the CEO of this company that gives you money that is also on your board, is there a declaration of conflict of interest? And where is the minutes of that company's meeting where it was disclosed that this person is a board member, and were they involved in the decision of whether or not you got money? And I sat there with a mouthful of teeth going, I don't know. But it was a good learning curve for me. So make sure that you are ready for your audits, because your auditors, if they're doing their job properly, will be answering these questions when they do litmus tests of your donors. And nowadays, anyone can find this information, so just make sure you manage that. And then no to operating while insolvent. At the end of the day, if an organization is in financial trouble, the board should be the first one saying, guys, We've got to pull a bunny out the hat, or we've got to start winding down. Because at the end of the day, they are the directors. So the duties and responsibilities, this is about the individual. The last slide was about the board as a group. So some nice things here to work with. And bear some of this in mind when you are onboarding and recruiting new board members, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Now, over to you, Mel. If my slides will move today, what is going on? Don't know what's going on today. We're having a moment. Sorry, guys. There we go. That one's yours, Melanie.
It is? I thought it was yours.
No, it's yours.
Now it's mine. You know, everybody talks about, I sit on this board and I sit on that board and I do this and I do that. But I'm not convinced that all board members fully understand the huge responsibility that they bear, not just from an ethical perspective, but from a fiduciary perspective as well. And we found this on a Deloitte document and really thought that it gives you a really strong, detailed overview of what's expected from board governance versus what we would call corporate governance, or in our case, nonprofit governance. So if you look at the green, those are the areas where the board bears ultimate responsibility. So that's around performance, strategy, governance, talent, and integrity. Very important. And the four blue items, the compliance, reporting, operations, and planning, belong to us as the implementers. But critically at the center of all of this is risk. And it's part of the board's job to mitigate that risk. And what I love about this particular image is that embracing risk all the way around is culture. And that's everyone's responsibility. The board plays a role in forming and nurturing the culture of the organization. And we have been, and I know Kelvin can speak from experience as well, we have been in cultures that have been incredibly toxic. And it has had a very clear impact, not just on the operations of the organization, but on their fundraising too. So it definitely is a piece of the same pie. And we really need to keep all of these things in mind when we talk about governance, that we are managing performance, we are managing strategy, we are looking at are we ticking the compliance boxes of our governance commitments, and are we taking them to heart? Because it's one thing to tick a box. Box ticking is very easy, but living it, breathing it, making it happen, keeping it within the culture of the organization, that is the challenge. And I think that this really encapsulates all of those responsibilities, commitments, and sometimes ethical dilemmas that are faced by boards, particularly in South Africa.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you for picking that one up. Yeah, it's an interesting slide. It's a lovely tool. And just remember that same thing, which is the risk, because if any of this is not being effectively managed, it's going to contribute to your risk, which flows out to your culture and so forth. Right. So, institutional knowledge and history. And our numbers have gone completely out, Mel. So we both done this, so we can sort it out. We'll make it happen.
Go ahead.
Right. Strategy. So we're going to unpack this. So does the board provide active oversight in developing your strategy? Or does management develop it, CEO presents to the board, it gets tick boxed, and the board, CEO comes back and says, strategy is approved? Board really need to unpack and understand that strategy. Does the board process a good understanding of the risk to the strategy? So those that may limit value creation or even cause the strategy to fail. And the risk of the strategy, those associated with scenarios of that strategy. So to unpack that, we've seen this, and another hobby horse of mine. We're an organization, we focus on greening and planting trees, and that's what we do. And COVID comes along and we start doing food parcels. How is that in your strategy? And the board says, no, 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 we must do food parcels because this is going to give us food parcels and we've got to do it. And we all run off and do it. So the board really needs to have a good understanding of the risks, because the strategy is one thing, but unless you're doing a risk matrix aligned to the strategy, and given what we've gone through in the last 6 months, you all should have relooked at your strategy and relooked at your risk matrix, because it's had a direct impact. Some of us have raised more money because of COVID. Some of us have paid a hard price because of COVID. Does the board ask those probing questions, including those that challenge assumptions of the strategy presented? So organization A is doing great work working with children in children's hospitals, and we are going to raise 20 million rand next year. Fantastic. How? From whom? How long is it going to take to raise the money? And your budget is exactly 19.99 million. So what happens if you don't raise 20 million? You've made a 19.99 million rand commitment. Those are the questions the boards are going to be asking. This is the stuff we're going to be unpacking. And I see this all too often, and Mel, please chip in, I'm sure you do as well, where boards have 15 minutes on the agenda to discuss strategy, and the CEO comes in dressed to the nines, has 5 slides on PowerPoint, quick overview, and everyone goes, yay, fantastic, we're going to do great work. And it gets signed off. Twaddle. Because unless the board is allocated a specific meeting or workshop or a subcommittee of the board that is going to spend at least a day or half a day unpacking and really looking at the strategy. And if they're true to their value, they should be unpacking and then saying to the CEO, go back with your team, rework it, and let's do revert 2 and revert 3. I've also seen the opposite, where organizations spend 2 years trying to finalize the strategy. So it's that balance. But the board needs to be asking those probing questions. And linked to this is the board looking at assessing potential new risks the strategy can create, and can those be managed? And that's especially when you're expanding into new areas, when you're going into a new province, launching a new country. I had an organization that I was working with recently where they have to relook at their model completely because it's something that wasn't their fault. So it's thrown their strategy completely, but they've got to unpack that. If they're suddenly going to open an office in Germany to raise money, you've got to unpack that. What are those risks? Because if you don't have this documented, when it all falls down and someone's going to answer a question and the board turns around and says, but where were we consulted? Where did we approve this? Where did we talk about this? And you can't give evidence-based proof. Management has gone ahead and done their own thing, which shouldn't happen. And vice versa. The board need to understand and talk to management, because sometimes the board can also make some suggestions and approve some stuff that practically can't happen. So one needs to have that relationship right. And then lastly is, does the board prepare for a scenario where its strategy fails? So we have this great strategy, and ladies and gentlemen, it happens to the best of us. I've had it happen to me, and it pulls your heart out when you've worked so hard on it and you've got this dream for your team and your organization, and it all looks great on paper, and then practically it just doesn't happen. It's hard, but the board needs to be able to ask those questions of, okay, what if? And let's scenario this, and let's look at the risks, and let's document it, and let's have a risk matrix for that, which doesn't need to be a complicated document. It's 1 page. Here's the strategy, there's the risks we've identified, and this is the mitigation we can do. So that you are prepared and empowered, so that when it all falls down, you don't feel like complete failure. And you can go back to that and then sit with your board and say, we discussed this, we did the risk matrix, we started addressing it, and we're on the road to recovery. And ladies and gentlemen, like any business, ask any successful business person, sometimes certain ventures just don't work, and that's okay. It's learning curves. You go into a new community and you think you've done all your homework, and then you realize, no. Or you do great work in this community, it works fantastically well, and you try and replicate here, and it doesn't happen. So what we're saying here is that strategy is not just a 5-slide PowerPoint that the board signs off. It is a living, breathing document the board needs to be conscious of, and you as management need to empower up to your CEO or whoever the person is that is engaging with the board, and presenting it. And I always suggest to clients, when you're doing things like strategy, your exco, your manco should be in that meeting with the board. It shouldn't just be the political CEO on their own, because that also has a huge amount of risk. Because some people in manco and exco have great content and value to add in the strategy discussion. And it should be a safe space to have open, honest discussion. Okay, let's move on. Oopsie, now it's going mad. Risk and culture.
Risk and culture. So, as we've said, and as I'm very passionate about culture, and there's a book, I can't think of the author, but the title is Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. And I really believe that the culture of the organization is what defines it. And it's our responsibility and the board's responsibility to make sure that that culture is a healthy, well-managed asset to the organization. So I'm very risk averse. I don't know about you. I'm not one who goes climbing mountains and doing exotic things. So that tends to spill over into all aspects of my life. I want to ask everybody to think, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, answer me now, but do you have policies and procedures for assessing risk? Thank you, Jackie. It's for lunch, not breakfast. It's absolutely brilliant. I highly recommend. I want to know how many of you have a risk register where you've actually highlighted your risks and have prioritized and gauged how they're going to affect your business. Because if we don't do that, we can be caught with our pants down, and nobody wants that.
Yep.
So what are those key risks and how are we going to address them? What will we do? Because wringing your hands like a Victorian maiden and weeping are not going to solve the problem. You need to have steps in place to mitigate, to hopefully completely eliminate those risks as they occur. So I would urge, if you take nothing else away today, that's our take home. Make sure that you have your risks well laid out and you have a plan to mitigate against them. And I would argue that risk is slightly different to threat. Risks may be something that you have control over, whereas a threat, if you look at a SWOT analysis, is something external that you don't have control over. And these are conversations that we need to have with our board, is have we actually put a definition to it? How open to risk are we as an organization? And that risk could be anything from where we go to how we invest surplus, to the methodologies that we use to actually implement our programs. And the board needs to factor that in. How does the risk match up against our strategy? Because the more ambitious the strategy, the more likely that we're going to encounter risk. So are we going to go with a very conservative strategy that keeps us in the safe zone? Or do we want to stretch ourselves as an organization, as individuals, and try the new thing and go into the new area knowing that there is risk associated with it? And my last question to you, and it's one to really take seriously, does the board have the information that it needs to make an informed decision about risk? Because if we don't give the full picture, it's like when you go and have your property and your car insured. They warn you, if you don't disclose, it could affect your ability to claim. Now, in the same way, if you don't disclose to your board the extent of your risk exposure, that could really harm you in the future. So I would urge you to look at these 5 questions and take them very seriously, particularly around putting a name to these risks and looking at, in the unlikely event that that awful thing were to occur, what could we do to make the situation better?
Thank you, Melanie. And on that one, a practical example, 2 things. Practical example is, if I said to you all in the end of 2018, have you put on your risk matrix a pandemic? And we all said, but we don't work in healthcare. We want there. Hello? Surprise, surprise. None of us were ready. None of us thought about this. None of us had it on our risk matrix, but I guarantee you it's on every company's risk matrix now going forward. So it's lessons learned.
Yes,
The other thing, the other thing on this is you have back to culture, and I'm sure many of you have experienced that. You have a change of leadership, you get a new chairman of the board or a new member on the board, and the culture changed completely. And sometimes we have a situation where it's top-down management, where the board is pushing management to take some risks. Management needs to do the same exercises we're asking the board to do. Have you sat down and really unpacked and very politely gone back to the board and said, we've considered this, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's the risk matrix. You know, we need to document this so it's on the table. And it's not because it's finger points, it's not because it's, and I've been in an organization where we loved doing this, the blame game. It's never me, it's always somebody else. But you don't want to create that culture, but you want to protect management and the board and the organization. So that if an external party or an auditor or a donor comes to you and asks these questions, you can answer them and say, we have thought about this as a collective and we've looked at all scenarios. So risk and
so
culture
I've got one question and it's killing me. I have one question to leave you with. In light of 2020 and everything that it's brought us, how many of you have a zombie apocalypse on your risk register? Because I think we might need to be taking things. Hey, we thought that until COVID.
Absolutely. So yeah, and I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this is guidance, this is best practice, this is international standards. And we say this in every webinar. It may sound extensively overwhelming as the fundraising leader, because I think, well, I just want to, I've got goals to meet, I've got budgets to meet, I've got to fundraise. But if you're not taking what you've learned today back to your management team and sharing, it does make your fundraising that much harder. Because when the wheels fall off the bus and your donors say to you, but how on heaven's earth did this happen? You know, did you guys do risk? What is your board's opinion on this? We're empowering you. So this is not about you as the fundraiser going back and now taking on risk management and all these other things. We're saying these are the issues the board needs to be working with management. And we're empowering you to take it back. So please don't onboard this as more work for you. This is tools to empower you to be a better fundraiser and to make sure your organization is fundraising ready, as we always say. Right. Man.
So of course, as fundraisers, number 3 is our big issue. Ensuring that the organization has enough resources. That's a really difficult one to predict right now. So it's one where there's a lot of risk and where we really have to be thinking, and our board needs to be thinking as well about, first of all, how are we going to secure funding? And secondly, what do we do? And again, this speaks back to our risk register. What are we going to do if we don't have enough resources? Is it a case of a program shuts down, or is it a case of we turn the lights out entirely? So Kelvin, if you can move on to the next slide.
I can do that for you, ma'am.
I have no faith that I'd get it right based on your struggles.
No, I'm flipping between 2 screens. So that's the problem, because I've got the messages on another screen and that's what's throwing things completely. I've just realized that. Right, there we go.
So we have to look at what these challenges are, and very often these challenges translate to risks in the same way as the things that we identify in our SWOT analyses as threats may be translated into risks. So you've got reduced funding, which we've known about before COVID. It's not as if COVID suddenly flipped a switch. We've got competition from other NPOs, and you know, I always struggle with that one, because I don't believe we should be competing. We should be working together. But the reality is, sometimes when it comes to funding, I don't know, I feel as though some funders turn it into an episode of Survivor. But where possible, we need to be aware that we are competing for funding. It's a healthy competition, it's a collegial competition, but unfortunately it is still competition. And initial estimates are that 3 million people have lost their jobs as a result of COVID. So that's in addition to the unemployment burden that this country already has. So I feel very strongly, and I'm sure that I'm not telling anybody anything that's news when I say that there's going to be an increased demand for the services that nonprofits provide. We also have a need to manage much more complex requirements and entities, and to fulfill reporting requirements and all sorts of things. So we're adding, and I know that Laurence made a point earlier that here we've got all these things to do, and now we've got to add a risk register to the list. We're adding these things all the time, and it is a burden, but it's a burden that once you share it with somebody else, it halves. And that is where the board plays an incredibly important role in so many of the things that we're talking about today. In terms of the fundraising, they have a role to play there, in whether it's opening a door, whether it's having a conversation with somebody who only wants to speak to the people at the top of the pile, whatever it might be. That things are much easier when we work together, when we share. And that's why it's so important to have your board involved. You know, there's a very fine line between involvement and interfering, and I do understand that. We all pray for an engaged board until we get one, but the reality is an engaged board is what we need, because they are the ones ultimately who make us look at ourselves critically, but also are there to support us when we have to make those tough decisions. So we've talked about this accountability and expectation is just getting bigger and bigger. And I think we're also seeing an increased level of expectation from our beneficiaries, which adds a whole new dimension to those challenges and risks. And of course, social media, which is absolutely brilliant until it isn't. It means that messages, both good and bad, spread like wildfire. So I think it's really important that we see the board as integral. I think I've worked in NPOs where nobody was allowed to access the board. Nobody could talk to the board. They came in once a quarter for a meeting. We all doffed our hats as they walked by. It's not like that at all. They are part and parcel of the organization. They are in the family. They've seen the warts. They've seen the funny relative in the corner, and let's face it, every nonprofit has a funny relative in the corner. They are part of the process, and they need to feel as though they are. And it's our job to help make that happen. It's part of the culture of the organization. And I wanted to highlight the last point here on the slide is the difficulty in recruiting quality board members. That's such a challenge. Because of the additional fiduciary risk that board members carry compared to how they might have done 10, 15, 20 years ago, you're finding people are more reticent about becoming board members. And you've got to seek out the people who are not there for the glory, but there for the greater good, for the why. And that can be challenging, but your existing board members are a fantastic resource when it comes to recruiting more. So I would really encourage you to have those conversations with your boards when you can.
Thank you, Melanie. Peer-to-peer fundraising approaches. First time the word fundraising is actually in this presentation. We're talking to fundraisers. So, peer-to-peer. How do we reach out to our board members and get them to wear a fundraising hat? And I know you've all suddenly fallen off your chairs and taken a second breath because it's like, oh God, I can't dare ask my board member to fundraise for me, or your board, it's not your board member's responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, your board is integral and part of your organization. And if the board as the leadership are not opening doors and reaching out and having your organization top of mind every day in their business world, then there is something fundamentally wrong. Your board members need to be engaging. But, and there's always a but, my question to you is, have you empowered your board members? If they have the opportunity to talk about your organization, do they know what you do? Do they know how you do it? Do they have the necessary supporting documents? Otherwise, it's going to be a matter of you're going to get a lovely WhatsApp every 2 minutes from your CEO saying, board member A says, please send a proposal to Mrs. Jones. For what, for how much, for who? And that's on the fault of management. The board is behaving that way. You need to make sure your board are empowered if you're going to ask them to go out and fundraise. And we are also asking them to fundraise. Some board members are not comfortable asking for money, but they're happy to do an introduction. Other board members are happy to go out and fundraise and ask for money. So you've got to understand and unpack your board members in their individual capacity. But also, it needs to be on the responsibility of the board and the chairman of the board when they're doing their own evaluation of how much has the board unlocked as far as funding and opportunities. And in things like legacy giving, when we talk about legacy giving, your board members, if they're not giving in their personal capacity, then there's a problem. Because how can your board members go out and ask their mates, family, friends, work colleagues, business contacts to fundraise or to donate to your organization if they don't donate themselves? And I know you're going to say the board members can say, but I give you my time. That's two different conversations. A board member should be giving a monetary donation so that they are treated as a donor and they understand your organization. Board members should be on every one of your mailing lists so they see what's going on. They should be following you on social media so they see what you're putting out there. They need to be attending events. They need to be visiting your programs. They need to be ambassadors of your organization in the true sense of the word. So although it's voluntary, there has to be some commitment. And the reason why we put the slide up, because when you're recruiting new board members, you need to be very, very clear of your expectations and their responsibilities. And a strong chairman will be challenging his peers or her peers to say, guys, as a board, we need to be opening doors and helping the management team. So I'm not going to read through the wording. It's there to read, but it's very important that board members are advocates and they open doors for you. And if the slide behaves, I really am having a techno day today, aren't I?
Have a little down arrow at the top there, next to the page numbering.
Now watch, this will work and I'll be highly embarrassed. Okay. Thank you,
Melanie. Took the blonde to get it right. I love it. So point 5 for me is really critical. We need our board members to be advocates, to be ambassadors, to be the people who spread the word about how amazing our organization is and the change we're bringing about. And it's quite interesting. I work with, I'm on the board of a Namibian-based nonprofit that's active in several African countries. And as one of the few board members, in fact, the only board member who lives in Cape Town, and it's also where the team is now head office, although their main office is in Windhoek, the CEO sits in Cape Town. I'm often asked to attend staff workshops if they have a lot of big international sort of multilateral type funders. So I'm often asked to meet with the funder to do an internal review or to discuss how we could see the new funding going forward. And it's been a really interesting experience for me as a board member. I've got to know the organization in a different way. So I'm a little bit like the token board member sometimes, in that, you know, I'm in Cape Town so I can attend the sessions. But I feel as though I'm offering something to the organization, that my availability to meet with a donor for a cup of coffee, or even if I can't give that much from a sort of a monetary fundraising sense, as we all know, fundraisers are not the wealthiest people in the world. I do feel as though I make a contribution. And everywhere I go, I advocate for the organization. I talk to people about it. I explain. I mean, heaven help you get stuck in a lift with me. Just know, if you see me standing in the lift and there's any risk at all of load shedding, do not get into the lift with me, because you will learn a lot about an organization called Positive Vibes. And that is part of what we need to be doing, is getting our boards to be advocates, to tell the stories, to share those incredible, life-changing stories of change that we find every day. But they can only do that if you tell them about those amazing stories of change. So our expectation of a board from a fundraising perspective is actually quite high. But at the same time, we have to then be prepared to share those tools to make it happen. Kelvin, can we move to the next slide,
Yep.
please?
Look, I'll press the arrow and it'll work.
Yay! So, like I said, it's that leading by example, it's reaching out, it's being the messenger and sharing the news of the stories of change that we're bringing about. And from that, we can secure funding, we can secure volunteers, we can recruit new board members. Sometimes we even get to recruit new staff that way. So I really would encourage you to bring your board into the family and make them part of the DNA of the organization.
And Mel, just a subtle point in the background, graphic reviews, because if you've got an engaged board, you're going to be ahead of the pack and your competitors.
Absolutely.
Right, performance, my hobby horse. Boards, although they are volunteers, they have a fiduciary responsibility. If the board is not doing a review of the organization's performance and its own progress towards the organization achieving those annual goals, you might as well shut shop now. Because, and I say that flippantly, but I guarantee you, 50% of you on this call, if we had to do a poll, your board has not done a 360 review of themselves or the organization in the last 2 to 3 years. It's a major challenge we have, and we have to change that culture. Does the board review the appropriate information in terms of scope, level of detail and timelines, necessary for directors to understand the organization's performance? So it's not, and I've seen this where chairmen of boards are accountants, and it doesn't matter what you put in the M&E and the reporting, it's straight to the last page, the financials, and have we made money? You can't just measure on that. There's so much more that you have to measure on. So the board really needs to look at performance of the organization annually and themselves. Are your annual goals realistic and achievable? Back to that strategy. And does the organization need or make mid-year adjustments to its targets and objectives? And I know there's 1 or 2 people, finance people on this call, and I'm not going to name names, but individuals that are on the call that have worked with me in the past are probably going, because so often we see this happen. A budget is a budget, and a strategy is a strategy, but you've got to review it, and you've got to be flexible enough to tweak it and change it and alter it, and the board needs to be involved in that. Is the board satisfied that that the organization is using its resources appropriately, and that the stakeholders' objectives have been met? And there was a question earlier on about stakeholders. Stakeholders is everybody outside your front door. It is the public, it is your donors, it is your beneficiaries, it is society. So are your resources being used effectively for your purpose and your why? And then lastly, which is the contentious one, is does the board communicate its analysis of the organization's performance to its stakeholders? Does the board go back to its stakeholders and say, we've done a 360 review of our organization. We've identified our weaknesses. We've identified our successes. We've built it into our strategy. None of us are perfect. There is this unwritten perception, unwritten rule and perception that charities, because we donate, we get money from the public or money from donors, that we are 100% perfect and we're never going to fail, and a project's always going to achieve 100% of its goals and its objectives. And I've said this before. If you tell me that you're feeding 100 children a day, and you tell me for 365 days of the year, you fed exactly 100 children every single day, I will tell you are lying. Because projects are fluid. Children will be sick some days. Children will fall off a program. New children will come on. One day you're feeding 94, the other day you're feeding 104. That is life. But we've got to be brave enough to be able to put our dirty laundry within reason out there to say, these have been our successes. These have been our challenges in our sector. And this is how we're fixing it. Because if you're completely transparent with your donors, especially, your donors are not stupid. they are more likely to support you than if you have that perfect number on every single report. But it also takes driving from the board to challenge management and to ask these questions and to do that internal reflection. Right, so I'm sensitive of time, Mel.
So some of the things we need to consider very quickly, a little bit of a wrap up. Does the board's mandate describe the structure for the board and its committees? How long does the person serve on the board? How do we select new board members? Does the NPO have an audit? Is there an audit committee on the board? And does the board have an orientation program? That's absolutely critical. You know, we throw boards in at the deep end and they're just expected to figure out what's going on based on your annual financials for the last 3 years. Do we have an induction program in the same way as you have an induction program with new staff? And is there a continuing education program? Positive Vibes, the organization I'm on the board of, in every board meeting, there's an education session about one of their programs. And that has been an incredibly powerful tool for me. When I go out and I trap people in lifts during load shedding, that's the information that I share. So really think about those 5 things. Is the mandate clear? Do we have proper terms of office? How do we select new boards? I had to go through a whole criminal check to be accepted onto the board at PV. So I'm really excited about that. I feel it gives me some sort of endorsement. I'm not a criminal. PV thinks I can be on the board. Do we have subcommittees? Is there a fundraising subcommittee? I mean, really, and definitely that induction. So those are the things that we want to be seeing are definitely happening.
And these are the things that are going to empower your board members when they trap somebody in that lift to open those doors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm very conscious of the march of time. It's 10:59. We did want to remind everybody that we have a notice board. And if you've got know of an event or something exciting coming up that you would like to share, please feel free to contact Kelvin or myself to do that. And Laurence had a very interesting question, and I'm not sure if I have the answer to it. Kelvin, maybe you do. In the whole concept of putting together the risk register and identifying and mitigating risk, do you know of any specialists who work specifically in that field who might be able to help a nonprofit?
Yeah, I do. There are, and there's also courses that the nonprofit can do as far as depending on the size of the organization and depending what sector you're working in. So if you're working in healthcare, you should have someone who is actually qualified and accredited to manage risk. But there are organizations. So what I suggest, Laurence, is put it on the WhatsApp group as putting something out there, and those that can help will contact you directly and say, we can help. We don't like to endorse or advertise any particular individual or company on this platform. Otherwise, we're not going to be fair to everyone. So in cases like that, put it out onto the WhatsApp group and say, guys, does anybody know anybody that can help us with this? And then there can be a direct conversation and people can then contact you directly. So in the interest of time, Melanie, and I can't believe an hour's gone by. We thought we'd have time for so many questions. So ladies and gentlemen, I've seen a lot of questions in the chat box. I really apologize that we didn't get to them. But as you can see, we are exceptionally passionate about the subject matter. And we may have gone a little bit long about some of the subject, but it's because we have been in your seat where we've had challenges, frustrations, but also have had the privilege of working with some amazing boards. So we do hope that today has helped you, empower you working with your board. Lastly, I'm going to hand this over to you, ma'am, to close up and say goodbye. From me, goodbye. Thank you. Please stay safe. But what have we got coming up next week? Remember the date change.
Yes. Importantly, we are changing our Thursday to a Wednesday.
Just for next week.
Yes, Thursday is Braai Day and Heritage Day. So we would certainly not expect you to dial in on a public holiday. And I'm hoping that as many of you can join as possible because it's going to be a really exciting one. We're talking about pitch decks. Nothing in this world is original anymore, and we steal a lot from the marketing department of companies when it comes to our promotional material. I love pitch decks. Anyone who's worked with me, and there are a couple of you on the call, knows how much I love the idea of pitching a proposal visually instead of with a narrative. So I find it really exciting. We're going to have a little bit of a kind of more of a workshop approach next week, and we're going to talk about how you can create an amazing pitch deck for your organization. So,
thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you,
stay
Melanie.
well, stay warm.
And
thank you, Kelvin.
remember, it's on YouTube, and we will send the link out. And if you're not on the WhatsApp group, join us. Thank you. Stay safe. And we will see you on Wednesday at 10 a.m. for pitch decks. Cheers, everyone.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Meeting. Come on.